Well, as you see, a proven model to consider. Okay? Our main speaker in this part of the conference is Mike Doyle, who is on your right. Mike is the Chief Executive Officer of Cornerstone Assistance Network. How many of you know what that is? Some do, but Mike is going to tell us a lot more about it and its great work in Fort Worth. Being an academic, I've got to tell you where he went to school. He's a graduate of North Texas University, but before that he was at the University of Houston, where he was a very, very good golfer and pursued that profession for a while after his graduation. And I learned during coffee this morning that he has shot as low as 60 on 18 holes, which is nothing short of remarkable to me. But he is very involved in assistance work today, particularly for the homeless. But he's also a family man, 3 children, and 10 grandchildren, 5 boys and 5 girls. He is a member of Richland Hills Baptist Church, a very active member there, provides leadership in a number of ways. So after Mike speaks, then we will hear from Elizabeth Darling, who in February of 2009 was appointed by Governor Rick Perry as the President and CEO of One Star Foundation, Texas Center for Social Impact. Elizabeth has been very active in a number of agencies in Washington, a very successful career in public service. She is a graduate of Baylor, and we look forward to hearing from her after Mike. And then our third speaker is our beloved Virginia Dupuy, former mayor of Waco for many years, and a very public individual and strongly and energetically engaged in public service of various kinds. She too is a Baylor graduate, twice, BA and MA, and has been very active in, as I said, in a number of public and civic opportunities, a real leader of this city, and is a member of Central Presbyterian Church. Okay, Mike, you begin, please, sir.
Thank you, Don, and thank you, Byron. Let me get this out of the way. So, that way I don't have to feel embarrassed now when I do it for real. It is a privilege to be here. I've known Byron for a long time. Cornerstone never started out to be an intermediary. We, like Nilsa, just were doing the Lord's work, and in about 1996, the Family Research Council, through Dr. Amy Sherman and Deanna Carlson, wrote a little book called Welfare of Thy Neighbor, and featured Cornerstone and Love Inc. as clearinghouse ministries. When I saw that, I thought, clearinghouse ministries, I wonder what that means. And I thought about that for about 15 seconds, and we went on doing the Lord's work. And then in 98, Dr. Amy Sherman was at Hudson Institute, and she wrote a paper and said that Cornerstone was one of the 5 most effective faith-based intermediaries in the country, and we'd never heard the term intermediary, and so in that period of time between her and Byron, we are now intermediaries. So I am not here to call you to intermediaryship. We weren't either, we didn't think, but in their wisdom, as people that I greatly respect, and know the field a lot better than I do, I'm beginning to see why God moved us in that direction. We just didn't know what it was called. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that process today, but it is not my desire to change your mission in any way, form, or fashion. Intermediaries have a very unique role in the delivery of faith-based social services, And I didn't really realize what our role was in the community until in 2000. I was called to a meeting with Rockefeller Foundation and the 5 largest foundations in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And I was introduced as, this is Mike Doyle, the president and CEO of Cornerstone Assistance Network, and they have no agenda. And I didn't know what that meant. I was kind of offended. I thought, I have no agenda? Yeah, we have an agenda. But what they were saying was, we are willing to be less so the church and ultimately Christ can be more. And I am glad that nobody knows about Cornerstone Assistance Network to speak of, because that means we're doing our job, because what we do is help churches do their job in the area of meeting spiritual, emotional, and material poverty among the people that they serve in their communities. So as we began to do Cornerstone and at Northwestern Hills Baptist Church, I'll have to kind of back up and give you a little story about how that started. I came to know the Lord late in life, being a professional golfer and business person for a long time. Of course, I hung around at the wrong places with the wrong people, and I have a story that I tell about a friend of mine who were at the country club drinking all day, gambling on football and everything else, and we had been there all day sweating bets and talking to our bookies, and I said to him, do you think we have a drinking problem? And he said, not unless we run out of money. From that background, the Lord began to call us into a work. And when I came to know the Lord on June 6th of '89, 3 years later, He's asking me to lead this thing called Cornerstone Assistance Network, that in November of '89, as my pastor was mentoring me in spiritual development, a family in a church of 5,000 went hungry over the weekend, and they had 2 children. And when I heard about that, because we ended up helping them, Kay and I personally, I had called him and said, we need to talk. This is not what I'm reading in Scripture, that a church of this size would let a family go hungry because it was Saturday when they called. I said, either we need to shut the doors or we need to do some outreach and figure out what in the world is going on here. And he said, let me tell you about a vision God gave me 15 years earlier when I was in Gainesville, Florida, about a church that would have no walls and would invite the community in for any kind of need that they may have. And I said, well, that's kind of what I'm reading right now. And so, being good Baptists, we formed a committee there on the spot, and he put me with a very mature believer, and we began to ask the church, what is it the church wants to be about in the area of community ministry? We thought we'd have the same 75 people that show up for all meetings show up, but the Lord was raising up a whole new body of believers who really had a desire to help the poor. And we had about 200 people show up at that meeting, and very few of the 75 that we thought would show up. And we had everywhere from bus ministries to addiction counseling to counseling centers. And for 2 years, we studied what we should be about. And during those 2 years, we began to network with the Richland Hills Church of Christ, the largest church of Christ in the world, is what I understand, who had a homeless program that was funded by HUD. And they were looking for congregations to become involved in the lives of those homeless families. And so through a property disposition program that was around in the late 80s, early 90s, where you leased the house for $1 a year from HUD, we joined forces with them and trained at Catholic Charities to be case aides. And we began to take on those families, and I attached a Sunday school class as a committee of the church. I attached a Sunday school class to one family, and we went out and we fixed up that house, and we painted, and we prayed for that family. We welcomed them when they came in from Brooklyn, New York, because they had just gotten back into town, and they were actually a daughter of one of the church members there, very, very high visible church member. And so as we began to minister to them, the Lord just began to do great things in the lives of the people in that Sunday school class. So the other Sunday school classes would come and say, we want a family, we want a family. And so sooner or later, I was chief operating officer of a company in Fort Worth at the time, and I was spending 50% of my time on this ministry at Cornerstone, or this committee at Cornerstone. And I told the pastor, I'm going to have to stop. I'm spending too much time on this. And he said, well, okay, maybe we ought to be looking at a separate nonprofit. So we formed a separate nonprofit. My wife and I were original incorporators, and we formed the nonprofit and in February of 92, and then in March of 92, the Lord said very, very clear to me, I want you to lead this organization. I knew what it paid because the church had put $30,000 in the budget for us in 1992 to kick it off. I couldn't even come close to working for that, but when I came to know the Lord for the first time on June 6th of 89, I told him, if you ever make it clear what you want me to do with the rest of my life, I will. And he called in that chip. And so I resigned my job in faith and accepted the position, started in 1992 as the first employee of Cornerstone Assistance Network. You'll see a little bit there about working to alleviate material, emotional, and spiritual poverty since 1992. In 1992, Cornerstone started. I became the first employee in April, and here is our organizational chart. And Liz, who does a lot of work with capacity building, will understand that's not a very big organizational chart. But that was it. We had 5 families at the time, and my wife and I were running around trying to take care of those 5 families. During that period of time, we also had 2 network partners, us, HUD, and a community enrichment center. We had 15 volunteers in a Sunday school class that was helping us with that, and we served 5 families with 32 units of service, and it had an annual budget of $30,000. Here was our first site. We got this first site because the Tarrant Baptist Association was going through a philosophical change of moving from running programs to teaching churches how to run programs, and that's our philosophy too. We don't think anything is going to effectively happen in the area of delivery of social service unless the local church takes their rightful place. We gave it away in 1945 to government, and we've been very, very gracious to let them continue to do it for years, but we're out of money, and the church is not. And we need to take our rightful place back, and the church needs to be a part of that, be a big part of that. So when I first moved to this building that the Tarrant Baptist Association gave us in July of 92, I didn't understand why so many people were coming there for help. And we did a lot of things there. But we were subcontracted it out with the Boys and Girls Clubs. We subcontracted it out with Senior Citizen Services. And they weren't doing the kind of things that I thought we should be doing as a faith-based community center. And so we asked them to leave, and we began to decide what God wanted us to do there and what churches could do to help us there. But before I could do anything, I had to get my hands around why people were coming there. I felt like they should be going somewhere else. Why would they come all the way down to just northeast of downtown Fort Worth in a wooded area where nobody can see us and come there for help? So there was a master's degree social worker, nothing against them, but there's a master's degree social worker on staff, and I said, why are they coming here? And as is her training, she said, well, let's find out, let's do a survey. I've done research since 1992. So she said we need about 1,000 people to have an effective survey. So we, over a period of about 45 days to 60 days, we interviewed 1,008 people that came there for help. And what I wanted to know was, where have you been trying to get help? And so we gave them 4 choices. When you first needed help, where did you go? Family and friends, nonprofits, government agencies, churches. And it was not surprising that 98-point-something% of them surfaced first when they needed help from family or friends. That quickly got exhausted. What shocked me and what God used to form the vision and mission of Cornerstone Assistance Network was that after they lost help from family and friends, 70% of them surfaced next at the local church. I thought that'd be the last place you'd go. Coming from a background not of faith, I didn't see why you'd ever go to a church for help. They seem to be broke all the time themselves and always asking for money. Every time you go there, they're asking for money. So I didn't think, why would you go there and ask for money? They don't have any. So I didn't understand what really their role was until the Lord began to open up my eyes a little bit about the role of the church. So when we asked, it so shocked me that we did a follow-up survey and asked those churches in that 5-mile service area, what are you doing for the poor? And if you're not doing anything, why? And if you're doing a little, why aren't you doing more? And after many focus groups and discussions with them, here's what we found. And I was such a novice at this, Byron, I didn't even write this down except on the results page. I didn't keep all the forms, and everybody's told me, where's that survey? I don't know, but if we ever do another one, we'll keep it. But here was the results. They said that we don't do anything or we don't do enough because we don't have any staff. We're already overworked and underpaid, and this is a relationship deal, and it takes a lot of time. Number two, we might do something wrong and hurt them rather than help them. Or number three, we don't have the stuff. We don't have the resources, and if we had resources, we have no place to put it. So God said, that's what I want you to do. I want you to be staff, knowledge, and resource so the local church can do exactly what I've asked it to do right where I've planted it. So we began to go forward and say, what do you need? And we began to build programs there that churches would come in and use the building to do those programs. And we did a lot of things there. We did youth programs, gang programs. Our first venture into public funding was there when I was one of those that said government is Satan incarnate. We will never, ever do business with the government. And we were asked by our mayor at the time, we need a gang intervention program. And if you remember back in the early 90s, gangs were a big, big deal, still are today. After the Get Tough on Crime thing, they're beginning to get out now, and it's beginning to be a big thing again. But at the same time, we wanted to do a program for our local gang. And if you'll see on that building, there's graffiti all over it, but it's Christian graffiti. And we kept having to paint that every day because they put on their gang graffiti on it. And one gang had come out and mark it out, and the next gang would come by and shoot at somebody, and we thought, this has got to stop. And so I just called a meeting of the gang leadership whose grandparents and parents came and got services from the community center and said, there's a place over by Pascal High School that's got beautiful mural of art that somebody did, and I don't see any graffiti on that thing. How come you're not marking that thing up and you're marking up our building? And they said, well, that's art. And I said, well, what if we gave you the paint and the subject matter? Would you do some art on our building if you're not going to touch it anymore? And they said, yeah. And so we got them some paint and every kind of color they wanted, and they did his wounds. Through his wounds we were healed, pray hard, work hard, all those kind of things we wanted on that building. And for 9 years that we were there, it was never touched with graffiti. So I began to think, if they're involved in the process, maybe in fact, they'll respect it more. And so we've kind of used that philosophy with our churches. If they're involved in the process of social services, maybe they'll begin to grasp on how this works, and we can work together on it. So we begin to target everything toward the local church. There's a lot of folks that don't understand what an intermediary work is. It's basically giving, when we take somebody on a tour of our building and they walk through there and they say, wow, I just had no idea. And I will say commonly, you had no idea that you owned all this? And they'll say, what do you mean? I said, well, this is all for you. This is here for you to use to minister to people. Well, how do we get them there? Well, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But the point is, everything that God has given us at Cornerstone is theirs for the asking. It's free. Just come use it to minister to people that you're trying to minister to. And I don't know why it works, but God just, for whatever reason, has blessed us with resources and favor into governments and nonprofits and businesses who see this as a call of the church back to the delivery of social services where we belong. Give you 3 examples. My pastor, new pastor at the church at Northwest Hills Baptist Church, Dr. Tommy Teague, been on our board for 12 years now. Still doesn't understand what an intermediary is. As a matter of fact, he says, people just don't understand this intermediary thing. You got to get back to this telling them food, clothing, shelter. I said, Pastor, it's not for us to deliver food, clothing, and shelter. It's for the church to deliver food, clothing, and shelter. And if you haven't read Bruce Fickert and Steve Calvert's book from Chalmers College on When Helping Hurts, you need to get it and read it. Because it talks about how we as believers, and particularly faith-based believers, have delivered social services wrong, particularly on the mission field. And it has to do with we're coming in and doing all the work, and everybody else sitting on the porch watching us do the work, and we're leaving them, and the church is no more equipped to follow up than anybody else has been ever. We need to be training that church. Maybe send them the $25,000 that we were going to spend on the mission trip and teach them how to do the work versus having to just come over there and do it ourselves and come back. So that book also is beginning to revolutionize the thinking in Tarrant County, because we're teaching our churches that same principle, but my pastor doesn't understand it. Our largest donor, who I'm having dinner with tonight, one of our largest donors, doesn't understand it. He said, I just don't understand how you explain it. I don't understand how you keep this thing going, how it keeps growing, and you'll see in a minute how much it's grown. I don't see how you do that, but here's some more money. And he can't argue with the fact. He can't argue with the fact, and this is what he says. I don't know why, I don't know how, I don't think it works. I hope that I'm wrong, but I don't see how this is working. But it's obvious. Just look at it. You've gone from this to what you'll see in a minute. And so tonight, we'll have dinner, and we'll have a lot of laughs and jokes, and he's going to write us a check for somewhere around $50,000, give or take a few $1,000s, depending on how his investment account went this year. So whether you understand it or not, gosh, it's just working. So I tell people all the time who say, when I counsel with them like Liz does on capacity building, and I say, how do you want this to look in 5 years? Tell me this grandioso thing, and I will say to them, do you understand, and let's just take it as being a homeless work, do you understand if you get it as big as you say you're going to get it, you may never see a homeless person again because you're going to be an administrator? And they say, what? And I said, if it's going to grow that big, somebody's got to pay for it. Somebody's got to be out raising money for it. Somebody's got to be carrying the banner, and it's probably not going to be you, unless you have the ego strong enough in your belief to hire somebody to do that work for you and become the face of the organization. Because as you grow, you get further and further away from the people God called you to be. So when I was called to work with the homeless, I've now probably not engaged a homeless person one-on-one in 10 years. But the organization has grown 1,000-fold. So getting me out of that part, I guess. So there's a lot of people that don't quite understand it, but it is working. And so that's what they can look at. They can say it's working. So today, in 2011, here's our organizational chart. Instead of 2 people, there's our building. Instead of the other one, 50,000 square feet that we bought 2 years ago. And when we hired our chef, now that's not for our staff, it's for a job training program that we'll talk about in a minute. We are completely out of space and looking for more space. We have over 200 stakeholders in the network, 106 which have signed memorandums of understanding as network partners, which have special privileges. We work 768 volunteers. That's an unduplicated number. They provided over 2,000 units of service in over 22,000 hours of service, which is the equivalent of about $246,000 or 6.5 full-time employees. We minister to 4,479 program participants. That's unduplicated, and they received 47,484 units of service. Why is that important? Because we helped every person with 10 different things, and we want to see how deep we're going in our service and not how many people we're going. If that 4,479, if we only had 5,000 units of service, that means we're doing relief, and we don't do relief. 3 stages of social work, as you probably know: relief, recovery, and restoration. We don't do relief. Somebody else does relief. We pick up relief when it's about to turn into recovery and walk them through the recovery stage, turn them back over to the church for the restoration stage. So that's the model of what we do. We have an annual budget now of $4.1 million versus $30,000. So again, I don't understand why. It's all God's deal. It's not our deal. I didn't have this plan. I wanted one program. I wanted to work with the homeless. That's all I wanted to do. But God had another plan. And so we are just opening. As He opens doors, we walk. And as He closes doors, we turn away. The scope of the services that we offer are wide, as Byron can tell you. We offer organizational capacity building. I told you about this meeting that was called to the Rockefeller Foundation when they said, you have no agenda, this organization has no agenda. The reason they said that is because they wanted us to spearhead a work that they needed an intermediary to do, and they'd read the study about a Hudson Institute that Amy and Byron helped form, calling us an intermediary. And so the Workforce Board, the major foundations, Rockefeller came to town saying, we're willing to invest $250,000 a year if you'll match it, community, to prove this theory or to test this theory. Money invested in the capacity of nonprofit organizations will create better program outcomes than money invested in their programs. Quite a unique concept, because it's hard for foundations other than One Star to fund capacity. If you need capacity work, One Star is your go-to source there for the state of Texas, and Liz will talk about that in a minute. But this capacity thing, will money invested in the capacity of the organization, their computer systems, their ability to gather and track data, gather the right data, board development, how do you handle a board, corporate structure, do all those things make a difference? We chose 5 organizations, and we worked with them for 5 years in Tarrant County. We had 3-city cohort between Fort Worth, Boston, and Nashville. Boston, probably still thinking about it. They think a lot up there. There's 60 colleges, academics up there, and they think a lot. And then Nashville just had some trouble in the local community, and they had to drop out. So after 3 years of the initial initiative, we were asked to continue 2 more years so they could gather data just from Fort Worth and Tarrant County, because we were carrying 80% of the results anyway. We did, and here's what the results showed. That money invested in the capacity of nonprofit organizations created 205% better program outcomes than money invested in the programs. So then you begin to see foundations funding capacity. Computer systems, data gathering systems, management systems, fund development plans, those kind of things. So capacity building is a lot of what we do at Cornerstone Assistance Network. We have people come into us and say, we don't know what we should do about this handling the poor thing. Should we have our own separate corporation? Should we just do it through the church? And we're able to advise them on what we think they should do. So we do organizational capacity building around strategic thinking, strategic planning, board governance, corporate governance, fund developments through One Star a lot of the times, foundation grants, federal grants, should you not. We take federal money so the church doesn't have to. And sometimes the churches will say, should we? And we'll say, probably not. You probably shouldn't, but we can talk about that. So we're a resource for them to do that. We do workforce development and job training. Why? Because the churches have said the biggest problem I've got right now is my people aren't working. And when they're not working, they don't have insurance. If they don't have insurance, they can't get their medical needs taken care of. They can't take care of child care and everything else. So we do a lot of workforce development. I talked to you a while ago about our chef. We hired a chef because we wanted to work. We found out from one of our prison reentry programs funded through a Second Chance Act grant that we'll talk more about in just a minute, that the women coming out of Dawson State Jail were being released to Tarrant County, 87% of the time had background, job skills in the food service and hospitality industry. So in our new building, we built a restaurant. And in the restaurant, we decided that we'd put them to work in the restaurant because they needed a place to live and they couldn't pay rent, so we thought we'd put them to work for us so they could pay the rent to us. And it was kind of a wash for them and for us, but they're getting to work. And so we, in fact, started a restaurant there for the food service and hospitality industry. We also have in the restaurant a catering company, and we're looking at the model of it's called Creation Restaurant. The catering is Creation Catering, and we're looking at Creation Cupcakes. Now, that's a long story, but if you ever bought a cupcake here recently, and it's not one of those Hostess things, you know, with the squiggle on top, $3.50 a pop for those things. And we saw a video of a lady in D.C. who got out of prison, started making cupcakes, took a truck, tweeted the downtown Manhattan office buildings that the cupcakes were ready. It looked like they were evacuating those buildings. They'd come out 50 or 60 at a time to get these $3.50 cupcakes. And so we thought, a lot of ladies coming out of Dawson might be able to do that too. So we're looking for trucks and things like that, working with our chef for a very unique recipe that we can copyright or patent, have you do those things, and make sure that we can have a Creation Cupcake that we can market to the downtown business areas of Fort Worth. We have a healthcare clinic where we do medical, dental, and the only ophthalmic theater we know of in a free clinic setting in the United States. We're starting in probably June or July. We're going to do free cataract surgeries, retinopathies, and glaucoma surgeries for those folks that we serve who are primarily Hispanic. But again, why would we do that? Job training for our folks. Number one, to put them back to work, because the churches are saying, I need to get my people back to work. Number two, healthcare needs, so that a pastor can say, somebody's coming to them and saying, you know, I lost my job, my kids are sick, I don't have a place to go, send them to Cornerstone. If they're one of our network partners, they can send them to Cornerstone. If they're not one of our network partners, they can't send them to Cornerstone. If one of our network partners doesn't want them back, they can't send them to Cornerstone. We tell our network partners, send us people you want to minister to. We'll take care of their needs, but you got to remain in charge. We talked about a while ago GED with the parole system chip. We'll tell our folks, if you want to do GED and you don't have the room or the technology or the capacity to do that, bring them down here to our GED class. We'll be glad to help them, but you got to come with them. Why do we have to come with them? We got 8 or 10 or 14 tutors in GED. We want the church in control. Why do we want the church in control? We're not a church. We're an intermediary. We can do what we do, but who's going to disciple and fellowship and evangelize those people? It's the church. It's not us. That's not our role. We're here to help you do that. Now, we led 179 people to the Lord last year, and we still have gotten about 16 we haven't placed in churches because they don't want felons. So that's another topic altogether. But we're trying to work with them on understanding those issues. See, I did it. Working on understanding those issues. So we do health care. We do retail. We have a thrift store. One of the nicest thrift stores you'll ever see. It's a boutique, actually. We get things from Aeropostale, Ralph Lauren, Polo, Ashworth, Levi Strauss, Toys R Us, Carter's Children's Clothes, Gymboree. Some we can sell, some we can't sell. And if you make it back to our free area, you're liable to see $145, $215 Polo and Aeropostale jackets that you can have free if you come from one of our local churches with a referral. You can only get into that building with a referral from a local church. You can't just walk in the door. You got to have a referral from a local church. So someone walks in and says, I need this. Did you bring a referral from a local church? No. Who's in that network? Well, where do you go to church? Well, I go to Full Gospel Holy Church. Whatever it is, we look at it. They're not on our list. We'll get them on our list, so we'll do a staff referral today, but we want to call them with your permission and let them know that we want to talk to them about becoming a network partner, or we send them to a network partner who's right around the corner and they'll do a referral. It's always got to be tied back to the local church, but job training is what the churches say they want. They don't want to create something like that. They don't want to create a $4.1 million organization just to do child care or just to do workforce development or child care or job training. We do that for them, and they take advantage of it so they can minister to those people because they're trying to take away all their excuses to do ministry. We also do, I told you about retail. In the retail store, we give away about $28,000 a month worth of stuff, and we sell about $18,000 a month worth of stuff to put money back into the coffers of Cornerstone so that we can do more programs. We do support services, again, in conjunction with the local church. And that's a lot of stuff. We do housing. We have permanent supportive housing. We have transitional housing. We have just plain rental housing. We have a housing development corporation. We build housing. We remodel housing. And why? To put people to work who have those job skills coming out of prison but can't get a job because of a felony conviction. We too are working on a bill to be introduced in the next legislative session to where when they get out of prison with a skill like carpentry or electrical or plumbing that they get there where they can receive a temporary license, and then after 5 years of not offending again, it becomes a permanent license, because what happens now, as you know, you can be a plumber, you just can't be licensed to be one. So it means you're stuck at the apprentice level for the rest of your life unless you decide how to own one and hire a plumber, and then in which case you can go into our entrepreneurial program and we'll help you learn how to do that. But we have housing. We have one place where there's 18 chronically homeless men who are coming out of drug addiction and alcohol and have been in prison, and we work with them. There's 13 of them back in college. 5 are disabled, will never go back to college. But there's a video on our website at www.canetwork.org about 2 young men whose paths crossed that you need to look at. It's really, really great about how their lives have been changed. We do reentry services through our Second Chance Act grant. We have a Welcome Back program that was sort of floundering in Fort Worth because it had a great, passionate leader, but no capacity. And we brought it under our umbrella, and you can imagine coming under our umbrella where you have access to grant writing services, corporate governance programs, mail systems, mentors, volunteers, how that program has flourished since it got there. As Byron knows, and we've talked about, there's going to come a time when small nonprofits are going to need to be strategically merged to survive. And we're really interested in how we keep them from going under and how we make them survive. But that income has been increased 350% since they just came under our umbrella for corporate governance, so that we can help them understand those roles. But in reentry, we'll talk a little bit more about that reentry now. Sustainability, we are very entrepreneurial in our thinking. We have coined a new phrase for us. We are not, now we don't actually publish in this in grants and stuff like that, but talking to folks like you that are friends, we are not nonprofits. We are not because of profits. Because it's okay to make a profit, but that doesn't need to be your motivation. We are not because of profits so that we can do our stuff and help create program income. Of that $4.1 million budget, about 28% of it, a little over $1 million, is from our own programs. The restaurant and the business model that we designed will net $60,000 a year. The store makes about $200,000 a year. Our housing programs make about $400,000 a year. Some of them federally funded. So, and they know about it. So we're entrepreneurial in thinking. You should be too. You have to go to a new level of thinking, and intermediaries can help you get there. Help you not just think about that kind of, just how you're going to do the program, but how do you pay for it long term without having to always seeking grants. So here's kind of a story and how we got to where we were. And we, of course, we had I'm very blessed, and I didn't even know we were doing it right, but all of my friends were in the business world when I went into this ministry, so my board's full of business people, and it always has been. But you have to have a willingness to, after you do your due diligence, to take risks. Risk is something people don't like to think about in the nonprofit ministry world. You have to have the ability to create capital or access to capital. You have to know how to build a sound business model and strategically use your assets so that you can do strategic mergers and those kind of things, because when we look at a nonprofit who wants to merge with us because they're about to go under, we look at their donor base and we merge it and compare it against our donor base and see how many new donors, if worked properly, would that create? What kind of income would it create based on our knowledge of what we've done in the past if we took over the marketing of that donor base? And so we look at those kind of things and use the assets we have to evaluate those kind of things. But let me give you the real quick story about the Second Chance Act grant and how this kind of plays into the thinking of sustainability. We received a Second Chance Act grant last year in October to engage women being released from Dawson State Jail. And we follow them, we mentor them 6 months while they're in prison, work with them on job training skills, all kinds of development they're going to have when they get out. How do you reconnect to a family if that's possible? We work with the family on the outside to make sure that they understand how to reconnect with the person coming back into the free society. So we do all that kind of work while they're 6 months from release. And then we follow them with the same mentor a year after release. We don't think it makes any sense to change mentors in midstream. It's the same mentor to work with them a year after release. Now, these are people that are released. They're not coming out on any kind of supervision whatsoever. And according to D. Wilson at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, their recidivism rate is twice that of someone who's coming out on supervision. So this is a real issue. They're coming out and just saying, hit the road. They don't even get the $50, I don't think. I just think they just get, there's the road. I hope you make it. And so our director of that program, after we were funded, Kelly Purcelli, who used to be with Prison Fellowship, working in the Dawson unit for the last 3 years, came to work for us, and we built this model around her experience there in the prison. And she said to us, the thing that'll keep them out of jail again is the chance of getting their children back. And so we said, okay, what does that entail? Housing. Well, we do housing. It's pretty simple. Where do you want them to live? I want them to live where your men are living. And I said, whoa, that program makes us about $28,000 a year in profit. How are you going to make that up? And she said, you mean I have to? And I said, yeah, you have to. If I'm going to kick out 8 men and you want to put 8 women in, and those 8 men are generating $28,000 in revenue through rents, you got to make it up. And she said, I don't know how. And I said, well, are the ladies going to work? Well, probably not for 3 to 6 months, if that long. Some of them don't have GEDs. Well, we have GEDs there. They don't have medical. We have medical there. They don't have clothes. We got clothes there. We've got about everything they need there except housing. So we're looking at all our assets, and I said, well, do a survey on some of them coming out in April and May, and tell me their job skills, what they used to do. And what did they used to do? Catering. 6 of them had background in catering. So we started Cornerstone Catering. We built a business model, found some investors, and we kicked off Cornerstone Catering. And so when they come out of prison, they're going to start using their skills that they already have while they're in our programs, not having to work full-time or real strict hours, but with flexible schedules so they can do the rest of the things they need to get done and work in our restaurant doing catering for them. We'll put together the capital needed to do that. That's not a problem, but they need to run that and make it their own. Contribute to their self-sufficiency, because we believe that you shouldn't ever do anything for anybody they can do themselves. So just letting them stay there with free rent is not compassionate. Our favorite saying is accountability is the most pure form of compassion. Being accountable, because you would not continue to let a child stick a fork in the light socket over and over and over again just because you didn't want to confront them. Being accountable is the purest form of compassion. So we think very entrepreneurially, and that business model will create about $40,000 first year profit in the catering company. And then the cupcake thing came along because my wife loves cupcakes, and rather than think, let's just do it because it'll bring in revenue, let's teach people how to do it, work with our chef on how to design a cupcake, and then build a marketing strategy where the ladies can do this as entrepreneurs. We'll find them trucks, we'll finance it for them, and we'll do microfinance to let them go out and start their own businesses. So, of course, we're going to patent the cupcake, so we'll get a royalty, which is okay too, because everybody wins in that. So you got to go through that process of how does this program perpetuate itself after the 2-year funding cycle's going. But if you're not willing to take a risk and do some of this hard work, you may not know how to do that. So how does that relate to the church? Church calls me and says, somebody got great skills, this, that, and the other, but they got a felony conviction, can't get them a job. What were their skills in? Well, their skills were in auto mechanics. Well, we have people all in our church network, and Chip, you mentioned this too, where we're working with our pastors all of the time and our network partners who in your congregations employ people. Would they be open to employing felons? Would they be open to employ chronically homeless men and women? People with multiple barriers to employment, would they be willing to talk about that? And we have focus groups and meetings around that. Not for us, so that pastors can put their people to work. If pastors are putting their people to work, they're tithing, hopefully, and so the church is better off, and they're better off, and the people are better off. So it's a win-win-win for everybody. So we are very, very entrepreneurial in our thinking, and we do that because we know that it's the church's role, and if we can generate resources to do that, then the church, in fact, can do its role, which is Matthew 25, 31 through 46, the part that says, what you did for one of the least of these, you did for mine, to me. And so let me sum it all up. And I'm on the last sum up anyway. Good timing. Someone comes to church for help now, and the church says, oh my goodness, I got to do 14 things, as the slide said, to take care of them. I got to start a housing division, a transportation division, a counseling division, to get belongings. I got to do all that stuff. We just don't do that. Or they can work with an intermediary and say, you know what, we really want to help you. Call Cornerstone. Here's the referral. You go down there, and we're going to walk with you every step of this process. And they come to us, and one of our caseworkers does a short-term evaluation. We put them on a short-term case plan. We say, you know, what you need is closed today, and we're going to give you that. But before you come back, what you really need is GED. The church has GED on 6:30 at 6:30 on Wednesday nights. You sign up to that. Come back. We'll help you again. If you don't sign up, don't come back. And so we tell the churches, send us only the people that you want back, because we're going to work with them, put them on a plan, but if they don't perform, they're gone. And you don't have to tell them, church, you can say that lousy Cornerstone, we'll talk to them and put the blame on us, but unless we're making people better, we're not doing all that we can do. So you don't have to say no, you don't have to spend time figuring it out, you don't have to decide what a person is worthy or not. You just have to decide if you want them back as part of your congregation, and if you do, you can send them with a referral to Cornerstone, and that's kind of what an intermediary does. That's it.
I'm exhausted now, Mike. Gosh. I've known Mike for quite some time. Byron is a rather new friend, but we've have friends in common. As much as I've tried to live out my passion, which is really working with people one-on-one to help them achieve self-sufficiency, I always seem to end up in a policy-making role or with state or federal government and a little bit further away from people in need, but trying to change the law and break down some of the barriers to for government to work with faith-based organizations. So in the mid-1990s, I found myself on the first Governor's Task Force for Faith-Based and Community Service Programs in the state of Texas, when it became apparent that the state was just about doing everything it could to shut down a lot of ministries that really had much better outcomes than state programs. And in looking at that task force, and it's interesting you use the word agenda, Mike, a lot of people came to this task force, 16-member task force, with their own agenda. Oh, I didn't have one, really, for real. I just knew that the bottom line was that there are a lot of people in need, and we need to figure out how to get the best services and put choice in that. If you want to go to an inherently religious drug treatment program, then you should be able to do that. Why should the state stop you from doing that? So from that, I ended up working with the Department of Human Services here in the state of Texas in the late 90s through 2001, implementing the charitable choice provision, which is how government interacts with faith-based organizations. And we were the first state in the country to really look at reducing the barriers, changing the language in the, the bureaucratic, red tapey stuff that really kept a lot of faith-based organizations from wanting to even go anywhere near government. And frankly, there are many who shouldn't. It's a healthy distrust of government that keeps the inherently religious nature, which is most effective to many programs. So I'm not at all advocating that all ministries should be partnering with the devil, as Mike used to think the government was. From that, I went to Washington to do the same thing that we had done in Texas and look across the country at how we could break down some of those barriers, because the federal government, at least then, has a lot of money to put into drug and alcohol treatment, into prison reentry, into all of the issue areas that are touching the lives of people in need. It was very interesting. I was in the faith-based office at Health and Human Services, and when you put religion and government together, it's a very volatile mix. You get a gut reaction. And I think why I was effective is that I kept trying to bring the critics back to the conversation about the individual. You're trying to break down barriers to help somebody become self-sufficient. How can you be against that? How can we change the language that government is using to be able to actually serve and help individuals? I found myself back in Texas at One Star Foundation, which to me is the culmination of all of the passions that have driven me thus far. One Star Foundation is several different things, but we do work across the state of Texas to build better nonprofits. Mike gave you a terrific definition of capacity building the business practices of nonprofits. So why is Cornerstone Network so successful? I'll tell you why. It's because they have sound business practices, and they can take under their wings so many other nonprofit efforts and leverage the skill, the strength, and the knowledge that they have as an administrative entity to help those smaller ministries flourish, so that he can provide this cadre of wraparound services for the folks in need in his area. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we talk about in capacity building with nonprofits. We're really trying to talk too about, and Mike's got this concept, he's the poster child for what we're talking about knowing where your ministry is really serving. Are you meeting an immediate or a presenting need? Are you feeding in the soup line? Or are you meeting a systemic need? Are you really trying to get at the root of why those people are in the soup line? Why do they keep coming back to the food pantry? We want nonprofits to know where they are in that continuum. We will always have the poor among us. We will always have people in need. But if that's where your ministry is, then collaborate. Know who else is around you and who else can begin to meet those other systemic causes for that presenting need. In capacity building also, we want to make sure that nonprofits think about profit, social enterprise. Mike described many things that he's putting right back into his organization, and that's why it's growing. Nonprofit doesn't mean that you can't make a profit. It just means that you need to be smart about it. And we talk with foundations a lot about really understanding the full cost of providing services for a nonprofit. They seem to mistakenly think that if they give you money, they want 99% of it to go to your clients. Well, how can you build a sustainable model and improve your business practices and even begin to collect data and improve your technology if you can't invest also in the infrastructure? In the state of Texas, in the last legislative session, in the 81st session, Texas became the first state to pass legislation that created faith-based liaisons in 14 state agencies. And those liaisons were to look internally at their business processes and what barriers they're creating to working with groups like you. One Star was named in that bill, and I sit on this interagency council with 14 bureaucrats, and I used to be one, so I can talk their language, but I can also talk the language of the nonprofit world and the social service world and make that link. Mike is also successful because he knows that language as well. An intermediary can bring credibility to funders. It's much easier for a large foundation or for government to say, wow, they've got their act together. They know how to be accountable. They can do the reporting. They can roll up the data and give us what we need, and it reduces the risk for the funder. On the other hand, for the smaller nonprofits that are working with Mike, they can depend on leveraging much of what the administrative, the staffing costs, and the work that Mike does to make those smaller nonprofits so successful. I'm very excited, and it doesn't sound too exciting perhaps to you today, but I'm hoping this time next year you will all be very familiar with a tool called the Texas Connector. And the reason why we think this is very important at One Star is it's an interactive geo-mapping system of the nonprofit sector. Right now it's a pilot for the 5-county Dallas area, but we're planning to roll it out statewide. And let me tell you why it's so important to what we've been talking about today. This tool is, the base population of this tool is 211 data, which is, as you know, is social service related data. We also overlay census information, unemployment, housing, single parent households, free and reduced lunch. So you can pull up on a map, you can type in food pantries, and you can do a prescribed area. You can either draw your service area for your organization, or it'll go down to the census block, and you can see what services are being provided. And then overlay that with poverty and other statistics, and you'll begin to do a gap analysis of where there perhaps is a lack of service. For you as a nonprofit, if you're doing grant writing, and I've heard today, we don't even know where nonprofits are. The government doesn't know where to find you guys. You don't even know where to find you guys. This tool will help you pull up the information of who's doing what in your area. Who can I partner with? So Nilsa, I want you to be able to use this tool to go, oh my gosh, these are people I didn't even know within a 20-mile radius that are doing some things that I don't do. How can I partner with them? And when you write your grant and you can show, you can demonstrate the need, the lack of services, and your ability to collaborate, I think you're going to be able to get additional funding and new partners. So we're very excited about that. We've done, we actually were invited by the Dell Corporation to submit a proposal to fund our tool. Now, how neat is that? So we're very excited about that. I'm going to close with just a little personal note. I found myself living out of Texas for the first time in Washington, D.C. in 2001. And then 9/11 happened. And I was relating this to my family this week because I didn't realize that I hadn't told them about my whole story, and I'm not going to tell you. But what was interesting is that I was the director of the Office of Faith-Based and Community Initiatives in a federal building, working under Secretary Tommy Thompson. Lots of bureaucrats in that building. And I had a wonderful God-given deputy, Kathy Dietz, who appeared the first day I was there and is a tremendous woman of faith. On that day, by, I would say 11 o'clock, the city was almost empty. Maybe it was noon. People walking, abandoning their cars. They shut the bridges to Virginia down. They were afraid they'd be blown up. But the secretary pulled 12 people around him, and Kathy and I were 2 of those people. I think he thought we had this pipeline to God because we were in the faith-based office. And I said, well, sir, this initiative is really about no faith. It's really about leveling the playing field and not looking at organizations in their religious garb, but in how they deliver the service. But he wasn't buying it. He said, no, you're staying. So we went through 3 federal buildings, Kathy and I, with evidently our faith-based hats on, looking for employees. He wanted us to make sure everybody was out of the building. We found people under their desks. We found some people frozen and afraid to act. And it was such a moment in time. And I thought, Lord, if you only brought me here for this one reason and this one day, then I'm yours. Do whatever you need to do. It was an amazing time to be a woman of faith in a city that sometimes feels rather faithless. So I want to thank you all for what you do. In 1984, my husband and I adopted a 16-year-old out of foster care through Buckner Baptist Benevolences. He's been my social service proving ground. We've been to jail. He's been in Huntsville. He was in the Marines, got kicked out of the Marines. A long, long story. But if we hadn't been there every step of the way to mentor, to get that driver's license, that social security card, to help him figure out a resume, to get to the job interviews, he wouldn't have made it. He is now 43, and he sent me roses yesterday for Mother's Day. So you may not always see the results of what you do, but just remember, you're planting the seed, and I do thank you for that.
Well, I think we're down to 3 minutes now, so I'm going to buckle your seatbelts. I'm going to talk as fast as I can to try to give you a quick summation from sort of the city's perspective about this. First of all, I just want to say that when I was elected mayor, I was quite surprised to even be asked to run because I had been in business, I'd been in the arts, I'd done about everything else and never, ever intended to go into, quote, politics. But I came to have so much respect for this community in that process. It surprised me. One of the things that happens when you're the mayor, you're supposed to show up everywhere. You're invited everywhere. You're asked to say a few words, sometimes in less minute than I have right now. But what I learned during that time was extraordinary. We have an extraordinary community. I mean, really extraordinary. We have everything we need to do what you in this room want to do. I want to repeat that, everything we have, that we have everything we need in this community to do what you're envisioning. What I did learn is that there's wonderful things. In fact, when you do that geomapping, you'll probably find a lot of dots in the city of Waco. There are so many nonprofits, but what I learned is they don't know about each other's work. They don't, it's not because they are bad, they're just busy, really, really busy, trying to get their own work done, working short-staffed, have not looked at the business side of things. And so when you're mayor, you also have the opportunity to look at it at a macro level rather than you get to be in these micro situations, but you must look at it at a macro level and begin to recognize the systems, what's working, what's not, and realizing that over 50% of the city's budget is going to police and safety. I mean, it's just, so the city is investing a significant amount there. But the other thing that I learned is that and this is the first time I've heard the term intermediary. That's what I feel like I've been working to do ever since I got into the city mayor's office. I mean, you start realizing that people are isolated, but they essentially want the same things. They really do want the same things. So it's just a matter of figuring out how you're going to pull people together. We started with a visioning project, and I won't go into all of that, but it's essentially the first goal that we heard the community saying is strengthen the heart of the community. Downtown, but it's a virtual heart. It's not, the downtown is just a symbol for the virtual heart of this community, and strengthening that. Number two, increase economic opportunities. We didn't say increase economic development, we said increase economic opportunities for all, which includes, of course, the whole education piece that I ended up spending a significant amount of my time involved in. Number three, engage leaders. The people in this room, when you stop and think about your whole community, and I'd like for you to even think, who's going to take your place? Who are you bringing up who's going to take your place? You're doing important work. Who are you bringing up? And so we're developing a leadership program. Number four, life outside the work. We work, but we've got to have good health. We've got to have recreation. There are all kinds of things. And then develop our unique advantage. I think in this community, many of us have thought we want to be like Fort Worth, a little bit like San Antonio when we grow up. But we realize, no, we need to be Waco, Texas, be very proud of it. We have Baylor, MCC, TSTC. We have everything we need to be who we need to be. But we also need to be doing more partnering, and trust me, I'm going to be spending a little time with each of you later because we need to look toward outside resources. I think at this point we have all the right leadership that we need in this community. Ken Starr, my goodness, what a visionary, what a great human being. He and Alice both are. So we have everything needed. And he has a vision, working with Carla Leeper, he has a vision for how Baylor is going to interface with the community in a wonderful and healthy way. I think that's my time. I did want to just mention one thing, because the word restorative justice may be a little misunderstood for when you go out into the community. One thing when in restorative justice I learned from the police is kind of a system that is used for reconciling the victim and the perpetrator. And so in that sense, we thought, that's why we asked so many questions. I realized, no, you're talking about restorative justice. There's a big difference in that and what has been defined as restorative justice. You are on to something really, really important. I commend you for what you're doing. Thank you for what you're doing. Know that I'm working as a volunteer. I didn't get to get paid anything, but a volunteer executive director of the Greater Waco Education Alliance. But that's an intermediary, can I get it right here, organization to help pull all of the people together who are responsible. And our mission is very simple. develop the understanding that every citizen shares the responsibility of educating every citizen. That pretty much encompasses what you're doing. I look forward to working with you, and I think it's 12 o'clock and I need to stop now. Thank you.